everyone, welcome back to Lettuce Leaf. Today I thought I'd do a sequel to the cottagecore villagers video I did, which is actually my first video to hit over 1,000 views, which is absolutely incredible. Thank you all so much for giving that video a watch, and obviously all the rest of them. For this one we are doing citycore villagers. So I know when I think of citycore, I think of the overly cluttered, super almost dystopian looking islands. However, I'm also including ones that are more Euro citycore, like Amsterdam, Berlin, those sort of cities. And those who might want to do more of like a superhero citycore vibe, I've got some villagers for that as well. To begin with, I just want to say what I think a citycore villager is like. Obviously, this is not a be-all, end-all definition, and feel free to interpret this however you want to. For me, I think about villagers that are grey, black, or more muted in colour. I also think about those who have iron doors on their houses, or houses that generally look very metal. But also, I'm including Eurocity vibes and villagers. So these are more the ones with like exposed brickwork, almost more autumnal in their colouring of the outside of their houses. However, not those that would fit more of a cottagecore theme with the style of houses they have, like maple or fauna. But I thought I'd just do like a little summary of what to expect for villagers for the rest of this video. I will be showing both villagers and houses, because I don't think you can really get an idea of how to build an island just around the villager's face. So without further ado, our first section is the cranky villagers. So the first villager that I think works well for a citycore theme is Admiral. He is an angry little green bird. Obviously you're gonna get a lot of birds in cities. I also think his house looks quite good for a citycore theme. He's got this wooden roof but with stones across it, and also his colours are quite muted. So I think that would work in a city. Next up, we have Apollo, who is a very popular cranky eagle. His house is more on the plainer side, but it's very grey, which fits that industrial city side I was talking about. And I also think his colours work really well for that one. Next up is Avery. He is almost mechanical looking. I almost see him as like a spiritual successor to Ribbit and Sprocket, like kind of fitting in with those. And his house is probably more of that European city vibe I was talking about at the start. It's more rounded, the roof is a little bit different, but I definitely think he is a citycore type villager. Next up we have Chief. He has this white and orange house, which is kind of funky. I quite like it. And the iron door, which is one thing that immediately to me says city. Also, he looks like a fox, and you get so many foxes in cities. Next up is Coach. Now, I don't know if Coach is going to be everyone's cup of tea. But his house is interesting. I think it kind of fits, but maybe it's one you'd have to work a bit more with. But he reminds me of like 5 o'clock shadow, overworked businessman. Next up we have Kurt, who is an angry, slightly patched up bear. His house is very muted in colour. Again, he has that same sort of roof that Admiral has. And I think he suits being in the city. He himself looks like a city boy. Next up we have Dell. Now, Dell's house might not be the vibe you're going for, but he is literally an aeroplane, which, like, that just screams city to me. If he doesn't fit in a city theme, where does he fit? I like Dell, and I think he's a cool one. Next up we have Ike, who is another bear. He's kind of interesting looking, and he himself might look a bit more natural, but his house is this really desaturated, iron looking thing that I think you could have a lot of fun with in a city theme. Again, this is more of the industrial city theme I think of. And our final cranky is Static. I love Static. I have had him before. He's amazing. He's also a squirrel, so like get him for his tail alone, honestly. But his house is black and purple with this bright yellow door, and with him being literally called Static, it makes me think of like static and electricity and different forms of power, and I think he is an excellent way to wrap up our cranky villagers. The next set of villagers that I am focusing on are the uchi / sisterly villagers. First up, we have Cherry. On the same lines as Static, she is a little goth dog who's very into like rock music and stuff, which is absolutely not exclusive to the city, but you hear a lot of like rock songs about living it up in the city and all that sort of stuff. And her house is metal, has that iron door, has that deeper knock sound when you go in, and she has like her little pierced ears and everything. I think she fits the city theme. Next up, we have Cat, who is a cat. They didn't see that coming. She lives in this really nice warm brown oak house with a metal sort of it's not pastel green, powdery green, that colour. I think this works really well as like a riverside European townhouse. Next up, we have Mira. Now, Mira is one that I've put in for that superhero theme that I was talking about, because if any of you are Marvel fans, you will know that all these big fights happen in the city, so why not have superheroes in the city? And her house is really nice too. Her house would also work with a European city type of vibe. Next up, we have Pashmina, who is this lovely little goat. She also has that sort of European city house. I really like this style of roof with the scalloped looking tiles, and I think she would fit really well, especially because she's like brown and her house is quite brown. You could have it kind of like an earthy area within the city as well if you were going for that sort of vibe. Like, obviously cities don't have to just be barren, you do still have wildlife. Now, this next one some of you might shout at me for. Being Rocket. Bear with me, okay? She fits that superhero, supervillain vibe, okay? I haven't included all 5 of those superhero villain villagers, by the way. But look at her house. It is like entirely metal looking. It's got that metal door to it, and it adds some colour to a city as well if you wanted to add that splash of colour. So I have included Rocket. Leave hate comments down below. I'll answer them all. And finally, to wrap up our uchi / sisterly section of the video, we have Tammy. With a Y, not an I. Tammy with an I is a whole other situation. She has a similar style of house to Chief in the colouring, but I think hers looks more like a townhouse. And she's quite a cool looking little bear. She'd definitely be like vibing in the city. And that wraps up our sisterly, uchi, whatever you prefer calling them, section. Next up, we have the lazy boys. Now, I only have a few for this because I couldn't really make my mind up on some of them. So first of all, we have Anchovy. His house is really, really pretty. I really like his house. And with him being a bird, he kind of looks like a sparrow or a starling. I know there is an actual villager called Sparrow, but quite frankly, he wasn't doing it for me. So you can imagine these sort of birds like pecking at crumbs and stuff that people had left as they've walked around. Next we have Barreled, and I feel people either really love Barreled or really hate Barreled. I like him, I think he's quite cute, but I do like all the cubs, so there is that. He is a grey cub, and he has this quite industrial looking house. It kind of reminds me, and like him as well, give me like factory vibes. So you could have him with like the oil bathtubs on something like factory tunnels and stuff like that. I think he's cool. Then we have Doc, who has another one of these kind of European city kind of houses. I think it's the brickwork that makes me think of that. Obviously you do have cities that still have these brick houses and not iron jail houses. So he can fit in any sort of city. I know he's bright blue, which might not be the vibe you're going for. But I can just imagine him with like his little briefcase going to the museum to help Blathers study things, or like going to his work as like a university lecturer, and universities are generally in the city. That's the vibe I get from Doc. And to wrap up the lazy villagers, we have Raddle. If you want me to explain why I've put Raddle here, just read the past sort of 12 months of newspapers and you might know. Next up, we have Peppy villagers. To start with, we have Bella. Her house is gorgeous. Like, you could do so much with that house. I think it's really, really pretty. And she's a mouse. And obviously you'd get mice and like rats and stuff scurrying about the place, because it's just going to happen in more densely populated places, which cities tend to be. She is also really into metal. She's like a little goth mouse. And I think she's quite cool. But mice, cities, this beautiful house, I couldn't not include Bella. Then we have Carmen, whose house is almost cottagecore, I suppose. Obviously there is always some overlap with these themes, and like I said earlier, you never have to like strictly stick everyone in this theme and nothing else, and you can't possibly betray this list. Like, of course that's not true. But her herself reminds me of like a go-getter, a girl in the city who's just trying to make her way in the music industry or the fashion industry or whatever she's trying to do with her life. To me, she belongs in the city. Then we have Dottie, who has that kind of plain style house that Apollo had, where it's muted, it's quite greyed out almost, which fits in any sort of a city. And also she's black and white with this like pop of blue in her ears. And if you had that industrial kind of theme, I think she fits, because I've noticed of the industrial islands that I visited, they don't tend to have colourful villages either, and she's black and white, so she suits that. Next up, we have Felicity. Her house is probably the one on here that's the least city focused. You could definitely make this house suit in certain city themes depending on what you were going for. It's more the pink roof, I think, that might throw people, but then you could always match that to different flowers and have it like she'd painted her own roof because she wanted to be different and be a bit quirky and out there, which her as a peppy villager, especially with this like curled up I'm a bit different fringe she's got going on, I think you could really have fun with Felicity as a villager. And finally, to wrap up our peppy villagers section, I have Patty, whose name really upsets me, but we won't focus on that. Her house is like the most picturesque Dutch house. Like, I can picture this on one of the many canals or rivers across the Netherlands, like in Amsterdam or by the docks in Rotterdam or something. I think this house is stunning. Our next villager personality that I'm going to focus on is Jocks. To begin with, we have Biff. I love Biff. I've never had him, but the fact he looks like this and so angry, but because he's a jock, he has a really high-pitched voice, like tickles me to no end. And look at his house. His house is metal on metal on metal. His house is exactly the thing that comes to mind when I think of that overly exploited, all resources have been used up, dystopian, the world is ending kind of city. He also fits like in normal cities, but this is the sort of thing like where you've grabbed scrap metal to try and pull a house together because everything else has been pillaged, sort of thing. You know what I mean? Maybe not. Next up, we have Kit Kat. Now, housing reasons, very similar to Biff, so I won't go into that again. And he's a little superhero, so if you wanted to go for that superhero city, both him and his house fit. Or even if you wanted to do like a normal city but have like a token superhero. So that's why you have no crime, because you have this superhero like hiding out in the city somewhere. You could even tuck him away. Like, he wants this quiet slice of life, but he can't be too far away from the action where he might be needed. Next up, we have Ribbot. He is literally a mechanic frog. How could I not include him? His house also has that iron door, and the colours are very, very muted. He definitely works in city core themes. Maybe less so your Euro city, but other cities I really think he's a great villager. Then we have Sprocket, who is similar to Ribbot, but he is a robot ostrich. His house is this green metal, which is really cool. I actually really like the emerald greens of his house. I also think you could have these two, if you wanted them both, or just one of them, as like an evil inventor's project, or they are the evil inventor, and they can have this like sparky, rusty, industrial looking laboratory where they experiment on other things like other animals to see if they can have robot versions of that. Kind of like Dr. Eggman from Sonic. If you want to make a Mobius inspired island, there you go. And everyone gets a Mabel anyway, and there's your Sonic. The final villager that we have for our jock section is Stinky. I like that he's covering his nose, almost like the smell of the city and all the smog and everything has got too much. Also, his house is again this iron kind of looking thing, but his colours are quite unique for a house. They match him perfectly, obviously not his discoloured green that he has going on. That honestly could be a mutation from how gross the city has got. Next up, we have our snooty villagers. To begin with, I've included Blair. Her house is really, really pretty. I love the like burnt sunset colour of her roof especially. I think that's gorgeous. And imagine it in autumn when all the trees start turning into different shades of orange and red as well. And also, I haven't really included many squirrels. And squirrels, I think, would be scurrying around, trying to scavenge on things like different bits of like nuts and branches that had fallen down from people walking around. Next, we have Kitty. She is killing it. She's got that bright pink eyeshadow going on. She doesn't care what anyone thinks of her. She's just in the city, doing her business, and no one else can get in her way. Her house is really pretty. I love the blue of the roof. I personally would really want to incorporate that with something water-based. Like, you could have your city's fountain feature near her house if you wanted to. And the browns and the brickwork and the door that she has match the Zen bridges really well. The next one we have is Mayel. Her house is really pretty. I love the reds of it. I love that she has this almost orangey pink brickwork going on, and her house would really fit in a city island. But that's not the main reason I've included her. She looks like your most stereotypical Karen with that haircut, and you just know every single business in every single city has had to deal with someone who wants to speak to the manager. If you disagree with me, you're wrong. Next up we have Pecan. She's a chipmunk-inspired squirrel. Her house gives me like super chic city suburban living vibes. Like, she'd be living in the city for most of the time, but she'd also escape to her like chalet in France with the vineyard behind her. I kind of really went a bit ham on the squirrels in this bit apparently, but our next one is Tasha. Her house, her colouring, everything is so city core. She is black and white. She is a skunk, which I could imagine scurrying around bins and stuff, kind of like raccoons. She's got this iron looking roof with the tiles being that off-white colour, and she has a face that looks like she has an attitude, and that she has seen so much happen in this city that whatever nonsense is going on in the subway right now just doesn't even faze her. Next up we have Tiffany. Her house is like super dark. It is almost entirely black apart from that bright white door. As we know, she is based off of a Playboy bunny, but taking that one step further, I think you could use her as like a lady of the night. But even aside from that, her house is beautiful for a city core island. You could have her like tucked away in the shadows and everything. With her house being that dark, I feel like there's so much you could do. I think that would be really fun to play with, just how dark her house is. And finally, to wrap up our snooty villagers, we have Vivian. She also reminds me almost of a fox. I know I didn't include Audie in the Peppy villagers section. She is too tropical in my eyes to fit this theme. Especially her house. It's like bright blue, it's all rounded. She's always got these sunglasses on. I know she is literally a fox, but I didn't think she fit well enough to be included in a City Core Villagers video. If you think otherwise, you do you. I'm not going to judge. But Vivian wraps up our snooty villagers section. Our last male villager species section is the smug villagers. First up, we have Eugene. He is just such a cool dude. Of course he would be in the city. With his sunglasses and his leather jacket and his I don't give one flying anything about you and your opinion attitude. His house is also really pretty, and I think it could fit any sort of city, honestly. The colours really work for any of it, and the brickwork of his house almost exactly matching the inside of his ears I think is really nice. I think that's a really nice touch. Next up, we have this bird called, I think, jocks. Correct me if you can like actually speak French and tell me how to say it properly. He's this really cool looking bird. He has this little hat on. He looks like he's kind of slumming it a little bit in the city, waiting for that big break that we all know is definitely coming. His house is really funky too. He's got the green roof with the black brickwork and the blue door, which I think is a really funky looking house for a city core theme, especially if you wanted to go for that industrial, like overly exploited city. You could even make out like the bricks are the most absorbent, so they've absorbed a lot of the soot more than the rest of the house has yet. Next up, we have Kyle, who is a hyena villager. His house is so city core, but even with it being wooden, like it's very muted. The colours look like someone's turned down the saturation on them completely, like all the life has been like sucked out of it almost. He's a really cool looking dude as well. I think he fits in like any sort of a city core island. I really think Kyle is a great villager for city core because there's a lot you could do, and there's quite a few different ways you could go with him in a city. Next up is Phil, who is this smug ostrich bandit kind of looking thing. He kind of fits as like a villain if you wanted to go for that superhero villain theme in a city. But also his house is beautiful and very, very fitting for that more European city vibe. So I think you could honestly incorporate Phil into any sort of city core island. And if you're someone who enjoys creating your own lore for your island or your villagers, he can be a really fun character to do that with. I think anyway. And finally, for our smug villagers, we have the people's champion. We have Raymond. Obviously, I had to include Raymond. His house is gorgeous, very, very European city vibes, especially with that metal spiral design in the glass on his door. But most importantly, he is the business cat. He is going to his office job. He's going home to an office as well, apparently. He's black and grey. His only real colour comes from his ears and obviously his mismatched eyes. With being almost completely monochrome, he fits in every type of city. You can have him as the overworked city business fat cat, or you could have him as like the business trip cat who's brought his office with him to a European city because he's supposed to only be there to do some market research, however you want to mess with it. But that's it for our smug villagers. And our male villagers. And last but absolutely never least is our sweet / normal villagers. To begin with, we have Daisy. She is so cute. I just really like her. I like her colouring. She's fun. But her house is maybe slightly too cottage woodsy looking for some of you. But I think she could look quite nice in a city, especially if you had that more natural city vibe going for you. Then we have Eunice, who has this really dark house with a slightly brighter door. This could work really well in all sorts of city islands, especially if you wanted to go for like an unspoken, hidden, almost horror vibe. Like, there's not really any horror elements there, but there's something kind of creepy and ominous about it. I think these dark houses are really fun for that sort of vibe. Then we have Lucy, who is this pig. I don't really see people talk about Lucy, but that fringe screams, I've come to the city to try and find my way in the world. And she got them anime eyes. Her house is very bright, with being these orangey colours and the orangey brown of the brickwork. However, I do think it's still quite earthy, but you could have a lot of fun with the pops of colour that her house has in a city. More of the Euro city, I don't think she'd work as well in like an overly greyed out sort of city. Or she could even be a damsel in distress if you wanted to go for that superhero vibe. Next we have Nan. She has this really dark, almost greenish grey house. I think she can work for that industrial city that immediately comes to mind when I think of city core. But then her clothes are very bright, so it's whether you want to gift her things that are duller in colour. I don't know if she'd then swap back into this like lime, yellow and green moment she got going on. But she definitely suits a city core island in my opinion. Our final villager is Poppy. Poppy is adorable. Her house looks like it belongs on the Riviera, like very relaxed, chilled out city vibes, almost slightly too far leaning to the town side of things. But you also might be watching this video looking for towny type villagers, and I definitely think you will find a lot of them here. She has this red squirrel pattern, which you might not find as much in your really built up concrete jungle type cities, but you absolutely would in your greener cities that have a lot of areas of nature throughout them. And what an adorable end to the villagers that I think fit in a city core theme. This is now video 2 of the what villagers should you get for X theme. I think the next one I am going to do is on fairy core because that's been quite highly requested. If there are any other themes you would like to see, let me know down in the comments and I will get on that for you. Thank you for watching. We are really close to 200 subs now, which is amazing. I can't believe I only started this journey like 3 months ago. I've also been doing some streaming over on twitch.tv/thelettuceleaf if you want to come and hang out for some live builds. We've done some floating islands and some picnic spots recently that I think have come out really good. If you want to follow me on socials, you can see updates on what I'm doing on my Twitter and my Instagram. I have a Discord server as well now. Link to that is in the description. You are more than welcome to come hang out there. And I think that's everything. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!